All right, welcome back, everybody. This is William M. Briggs. We're continuing on episode 26, which is really 27, of Uncertainty and Probability Theory, the Logic of Science. Today, I'm going to prove to you that the idea of randomizing clinical trials or any kind of trials does nothing, except one thing. I allow them one victory in this randomization game. And we've been talking about randomization. We've been what random means, what chance means, what all that kind of thing means. And so let's put it to use. You are a traditional scientist, and you have just been hired by some regime to eliminate its enemies. Now, you want to use crucifixion for this method. And what is at stock and what you have a lot of are these steel crucifixes. This one here is made of steel. This is steel. Okay? And you got some old wood ones in stock too. A few wood ones left in stock, but probably not enough. And you are a good scientist. And you want to know whether you can employ these steel crucifixes to crucify the victims of the regime. Or you're going to need wood ones. And so what you're going to do is you're going to design a randomized, what does that mean? Okay, randomized, controlled trial. Okay, this is the only way to get information. Keep this in mind. Randomized controlled trials are the gold standard, they say. And really, by the theory, this is the only way we can really get information. This is how we can get information, and really in no other way. So we got these steel crucifixes and wood crucifixes, and you have a bunch of people here. Oh boy, drawing is not my forte. Many things are not my forte. And you got a bunch of people lined up here, and you're going to randomize people. Some people you'll flip a coin. This guy will get the steel crucifix. This guy will get the wood, and so forth. And you'll conduct your experiment. Because there's no other way to know, says theory, which is if steel will perform as good as wood. So you'll conduct your experiment. You'll randomize these people. You have to randomize them. Randomizing brings value to the experiment somehow or another. Randomizing lets you make probabilistic interpretations of the results in the limiting relative frequency sense that we discussed a few weeks back. This is the only way to get information, they say. Well, of course, it's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. And the reason why we need to understand why it's absurd. If we understand why it's absurd, then we'll understand why we don't need, control is very good. I don't want to say we don't want to lose, we want to keep control. But we don't need this randomizing. This randomizing is a complete misnomer. It is a crutch. It's something we need to eliminate from our thoughts. And I prove it to you by the simple explanation that we know the cause. The cause of death on a crucifix is, of course, excruciating exposure. And the substance which makes up the crucifix is immaterial. That's a bad joke, but it's still true. It is irrelevant to our decision whether or not a steel crucifix will work as well as a wooden one, because we understand the cause. It is the essence of the death, the cause of the death we already know, which we can infer, which we make an induction. We make an induction argument. Remember back a long time ago, and it may be a good time to review this. I'll post it in the links below. Of the different types of induction there were. We did 5 types of induction. We use one of these induction argument, to say that steel is going to give us the same as wood. And so would aluminum. And so forth. We do that because of our knowledge of the essence of steel and all this kind of stuff, and because we understand the cause. Randomization is not necessary, but it is absolutely needed if we're going to interpret the results of our experiment in a frequentist way, or even a Bayesian way, in which we have to randomize results which somehow imbue the data that we're measuring with probability. They somehow get probability stuck to them in some magical sense that is never quite defined, that is brought to us when we bring this randomization into play. Well, no, we don't need any of that. We don't even need to conduct this experiment because we know the cause in advance by a form of induction. And this is more certain than doing an experiment is going to be. Now, okay, it is an absurd example. I don't say it's not absurd. I claim it's absurd, and I'm using the absurdity to demonstrate why randomization is not needed. But there are other times we might want to randomize. We see this all the time in, say, medical and statistical experiments and so forth, where we absolutely have to have randomized data. And randomized trials are supposed to be better. And they're not just better because they bring this magical quality of probability that somehow comes out of the ether and sticks to the data in some way that allows us to interpret it in a frequent sense. It also is supposed to guard against certain things. And so we'll talk about that level of thing. So suppose I'm doing an experiment and I have a proposition which I'm going to call y, which is the value of some biomeasure, whatever it's going to be, is y, little y. So my little y is going to be a placeholder, and my big Y is the proposition. Now we're getting more into mathematics and so forth. So I could do this. I could do experiments in which I could measure this, and I want to say this about people and so forth. So I could have, for instance, I want to conduct the probability, I want to calculate rather, the probability that Y is true, that Y, maybe just in shorthand notation, I can say Y equals little y, and it's perfectly fine to do that, given a series of measurements, which will be my, what I'll call X. And many measures of 120 milligrams, shows you thinking about all this medical data can make you crazy. Systolic blood pressure, for instance, I'm measuring systolic blood pressure. Milligrams of mercury. Anyway, I have 120. The systolic blood pressure, I'm measuring 120. And I'm claiming I took 120 of these, and I took many measures of these, and every time they came out to be 120. And so now I want to calculate the probability that Y equals, say, 120. Given this information, I can calculate the probability that Y equals Y, little y, is going to be high, without getting into any kind of mathematical details about it, because I haven't specified in this information that I'm assuming on this side. I have said nothing about any way to form a formal model, nor can I see how I can deduce one from just this stated information. But it's sort of obvious that that I claim every time I've measured 120, and I want to know the probability of a measure being 120, a future measure, another measure, a measure that's not in this set right here, is going to be high. And let me emphasize that. I didn't make notes on this, but X measures are 120, given the X measures are 120, and that of course is 1. I'm not talking about, when I do these kind of probability calculations, I'm not talking about the probability of the data I've already seen. The probability of the data I've already seen, given the data I've already seen, is 1. Of course, later on we'll meet circumstances in which maybe we measure some data with error and so forth, but I'm not doing that here. I'm assuming that this is exactly what I've measured, and we could do that for simple counts and the like, where there's no possibility of making a mistake. You know, count the number of green balls that we draw out of an urn or something like this. There's not going to be measurement error and things like this. And then I want to calculate the probability that I measure the number that I measured is always going to be equal to 1. So we're always talking about there's a lot of stuff. This is a good, it's an aside, but it is an excellent point to discuss this notation here. This is the real thing right here. That's the proposition of interest. The proposition of interest is the value of a biomeasure on some person. I have not yet measured the value. That's sort of all implicit there. Not yet measured. I didn't write it down. Not yet measured. Of course, if I've already measured it, I know what the measure is. It sounds obvious, yes? It's this probability right here. But because I didn't write it down, we can get confused about where we are in these problems. This, writing it down here, probability that y equals y, and some people will even write this as the probability of y given x. They'll just shorten this entire thing down to y. And like I said about notation over and over again, this can be a very useful device, especially if I'm doing a lot of complex calculations, and it's a very easy thing to do. I don't want to have to write down the value of the biological measurement, and somebody not yet measured is y, is a long thing to keep track of. But we have to keep it in our mind. That's exactly what we are doing. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So I'm talking about somebody who has not yet had their value measured. And there's another implicit or tacit premise that's part of this x over here. This y person, if you like, the y person is like, in a very loose sense, the x people. This y person is like this x person. And what do I mean by that? I can't mean that this is crucial. This is absolutely crucial. It's a tacit premise in both of these things. The y person is like the x people in some way. What do I mean? What way do I mean? I mean they share the same potential list of causes and conditions that make y equal this big Y equal this little y, that bring about this little y. So I say, whatever goes into creating these values here, whatever goes into causing these values here, and I am allowing that there may be lots of different causes, lots of different conditions, but I say that these y people share those causes and conditions. All right, I say they share them. I don't need to know in what proportion or anything like that, because I've said nothing about that. If I think that there are proportions of causes, then I would use a controlled experiment. If I, for instance, think that men and women, the two sexes, have different sets of causes, then I would control an experiment. I would only do men here, and I would do y for men up here, and then I would do separately for women. Although in the math, it would be something like this, and you'd have a model representing the sex in the model. We'll get to all that when we do models and so forth. But it's very crucial to represent or to understand precisely what we've done here. I said these people are like these people. If these people are nothing like these people, then this is irrelevant information. I can't say that I could say that there are random differences, but random merely means unpredictable. Random merely means unpredictable. It means I don't know what the differences are. I know there may be differences in the causes and conditions and so forth, but I don't know what they are. Then the differences I say are random, in the sense that it only means I don't know what they are. If I knew what they were, I could control for them. So I'll talk about that when we get into physics for a second. And incidentally, so random just means unpredictable. And it means, in this sense, unpredictable causes and conditions. I don't know what the causes and conditions are that might make these things different. Now suppose, though, this is just for fun, and I guess I shouldn't waste my time on this. I have a little bit of time, though. Suppose I claimed I was a doctor. I'm some quack selling some new COVID treatment, some new COVID vaccine or something like this, and it affects the blood pressure of everybody. And I say everybody came out to be this beautiful number of 120, and you're a little suspicious of me. So I could add information, which is suspicion. And I want to show you how you can treat, this is how we actually treat, and this is going to lead into James chapter 5, when we do James chapter 5, queer uses for probability. It's a lot of fun, that chapter. It's kind of mathematical and everything, but it's a lot of fun, the stuff we could do with it. But I want to show you how we get to this idea of suspicion. I want to calculate the probability of y given the data that I observed and the suspicion that I'm willing to entertain. Well, that's merely the probability of x. Whoops. That's merely the probability of y given x times the probability of x given w. Now this is still high. Given these values that I've measured up here, the probability that a new person is going to have this value is going to be high. That's true. But now I'm allowed to have a little bit of doubt sneak in here. If this is suspicion, if I'm thinking about this data right here, I'm going to say, is this really all the suspicions I'm having here? Did he really get this value? I don't believe it. I don't believe he got all these numbers or anything like this. So I'm going to say that the probability that the observed data that he had, given my suspicions, is very low. Very low. And then high times very low is going to be low to very low, depending on whatever you mean by low. So we could take these results and get them as they are. Even though they're going to tout this number, we really judge by this number. We're always multiplying probabilities of whether or not we believe this stuff by these internal numbers, and that's how that comes about. But that's sort of an aside to the whole thing here. I wanted to emphasize, when we're doing this kind of stuff, there's a lot packed in. When we write down a simple formula like this, and we got some function, some theta, blah, 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 and x and so forth. There's a ton of stuff packed in here. There's a ton of assumptions about differences and all that kind of a thing that are there that we don't write down, that we lose track of because of the compactness of this notation. And especially people who don't understand what's going on when they're using, say, regression and so forth, they make a lot of mistakes. Okay, now, suppose I don't have this, suppose I'm not a quack, and there are a lot of them, and I'm just making many measurements, and I have many measurements, many measures in groups A or B. Now, I'm going to make measurements of people. Maybe I have a pill, one pill in group A, pill in A, and a placebo in B, say. Okay? Pill in A and a placebo in B. And I'm going to make many measurements of whatever this biological measure is. And here now I need to say, well, I want to have the probability that it's y equals y in group A, or y equals y in group B. And that's the probability that I'm interested in, given all this kind of stuff like this. Okay. Easy enough. Now, what do we want to do? We want to run an experiment to see whether this works. Of course, I can't just claim the pill's going to work against the placebo. So experimenting, I'm not casting any dispersions on experimenting. And in fact, I say it's absolutely and utterly essential. We need to, there's some theory that led to this idea of the pill performing some biological wonder for us. And so we need to put it to the test in an experiment, in which we can do in an experiment like this. We are controlling for the pill or a placebo. In other words, we're going to run comparisons with the pill and placebo. I guess the pill I often use is Profitol. Ask your doctor if Profitol is right for you. That's now a cliche. It used to be, I told this story many times. I went to a medical convention a long time ago in New York, internists. And one of the doctors was discussing the doctor pharmaceutical industry sort of relationship and so forth. And I asked him, I said, I see all these commercials on TV, you have people, you listen with the sound off. cover up the bottom line of the television so you can't see the name of the drug. And there's just people cavorting, smiling, happy times. They're with children or other or adults, and they're just running on open fields or riding a bike, and everybody's smiling and so forth. And at the end, it's always ask your doctor if Profit-Hall is right for you. So I asked the guy, I said, this must be leading people to come to their doctor to ask them if Profit-Hall is right for them. Doesn't that increase the prescriptions of Profit-Hall? Well, if it did, you have to understand what they're admitting. If it did, they're admitting that these commercials have an influence on people, and they have an influence on the doctors who may be then over-prescribing Profit-Hall, because they otherwise would not have prescribed it to the patients if the patients hadn't asked about it. And this very eminent physician thought about the question for a second. He said, absolutely not. Well, he did not believe the commercials had any influence, any causal influence on the patients. They might have, he allowed that it might have been on the patients, but he allowed that there was no influence on the doctors who were utterly above all of this kind of the riffraff who are influenced by commercials and so forth. Well, you be the judge of that. You bring the causation to this thing. Now, again here. So I got a bunch of people and I want to randomize them. I got some people are going to go in here. Now, if I think that sex is important in this, I can control for sex. That's a very good thing to do. Control is always good. If I think that this pill interacts with testosterone or some other male characteristic differently than it does with estrogen, then I absolutely, in that causal sense, want to separate the two men and women into their own buckets. Makes absolutely perfect sense. Or people accumulate certain things in their blood, after they get to a certain age and so forth. I may want to control for age, because I think it's causally important. All those causal or conditional things that I know affect the eventual cause of the workings of this pill with the biology and so forth, or with the placebo. I do very well to control for those things, and I create subgroups of people who get those things, because I know that the causes will be different inside them, or I suspect it with a high probability based on other evidence that the causes will be operative differently on those people. Okay, so there's no harm in control. In fact, control is wonderful. Control is exactly the right thing to do. But why should, after not controlling, so suppose I got absolutely, I suspect nothing. I think this pill is going to work equally well in everybody. Therefore, there's no cause for me to do any type of control. Why would I want to randomize? Well, some people say, well, suppose there is a causal agent out there that is in the population with some proportion P. In other words, the probability that people have some sort of trait, given whatever evidence I have, is some probability P. And I'm going to put this, I'm not going to demonstrate the math here. It would take us too far afield, but I'll put it in the lecture notes on the blog and at Substack, so we can go through this kind of a thing. So they're supposing that this cause exists and they know it, but they don't know who has it. They just suppose it might be out there and it's in some proportion. And then if I split people up, by flipping a coin, this person I flip gets the pill, this person gets the placebo, and so on. And I randomize this thing here by it. What does randomize means? It means adding unpredictability. Random means unpredictable. That's all it means. And so I'm adding unpredictability about who gets in what group. That's all randomizing does for us. And then they say, because of this, well, I'm going to be equally distributing this other causal thing in these two groups if I randomize. It doesn't work, because if you knew about this cause, you should be controlling for it. And there's no guarantee if you don't know the causes there may be any number of causes and conditions, right? And the more there are, the more that is likely you'll end up with unbalanced groups. In other words, there might be, this is cause trait 1, and traits 3, 17, and 82 are heavily over here, and they're missing almost completely over here. Randomizing doesn't tell you that. Randomizing doesn't tell you anything. You don't know what you've done because you don't know what the traits are. If you did know what the traits, you would have controlled for them. If you don't know what they are, you don't know where they are. It's a simple tautology, a logical tautology. So randomizing does nothing for you. You have bought yourself nothing. You have brought nothing to the table. It doesn't give probability any life. We've learned that already. Probability is merely a logical relation between propositions. But here's what it does. Here's one thing it does do. Doctors fool themselves just as easily or even more easily than other people. They're liars and schemers and cheats and manipulators just in the same proportion, maybe even more than ordinary people, especially when they have an interest. A pharmaceutical company might have a financial interest of some kind in these kind of a thing. So what randomization does is allows or disallows them to cheat. They may be very tempted, and it's happened. They may see these people are sicker than these people. And they may edge these people, and it's happened many times in many different experiments. They may edge these people into here. But what they should have done, because these people are sicker, and they know that the sickness, the illness, is in some way related to whatever this pill is going to do, they should have controlled for that level of sickness. They should have controlled for that illness and not randomized it. You could have just brought the people, everybody who's got this particular set of causal traits in this illness or symptoms or whatever you want to say, we'll split equal numbers of groups of both of them. I mean, there are ethical questions and all that kind of a thing. Excuse me. Choking on my chalk dust here. I mean, we're going to ignore the ethical questions and everything at this particular moment. But what they're doing is they have known causal connections, and they're too tempted to move these things into the bins that they want. Or they may even move the sicker people into the placebo, and they want to have the people who are healthier, and so they look better in the pill. All sorts of things that happen. So what randomization does there is just like the coin flip the umpire does at the beginning of a football game, say, and wants to decide who gets the kickoff. It removes the control. It removes the predictability from the outcome. The umpire is probably not adept at magic and can't cause the coin to come heads or tails in any way that he likes. So we've removed that control from and satisfied people that we're not up to something. So that is a gift that randomization can bring. And so there's no harm in it. I don't say it's bringing any active harm. I don't ever mean that, except in our thoughts. It's harming our thoughts if we say it has to be there for some reason. And think, there's all kinds of scientific fields that don't do randomization. So if you're a physicist, for instance, and you're interested in a particular conductivity of some new compound that you have developed, you're going to do your absolute best to control for every possible cause, except one cause at a time that you can manipulate. Maybe it's temperature. Maybe it's temperature. So you're going to manipulate temperature, and you're going to try everything. You're going to make sure the width of this compound and the length and the amount of current that you want to go through it, everything is rigorously measured to the exact way that I possibly can do. And then you're going to control that temperature in very precise ways and do all this. You're going to do great experiments. No randomization is necessary or sought or needed. Because it's absurd. It's buying you nothing. There's no harm in doing it, but there's absolutely no necessity for it either. All right, so that's it. Randomization means unpredictability, and adding unpredictability does nothing for you, except in some circumstances it removes some of the suspicion that cheating has gone on. It doesn't remove it all. You can easily imagine ways to cheat even in the face of this randomization and so forth. So it doesn't even do that really. So I'm going to have all this stuff to read again at the blog. The links are down here and Substack and so forth. So please do the reading. I think next time we're going to still continue on this. I want to talk about things not having a distribution, and we still have to talk about simulations and the like. And then finally we'll get back to James in his chapter 5. much more mathematical kind of stuff, but it's a lot of fun too. It's not that difficult, and it's more fun. Maybe you'll want to skip some of those lectures. All right, that's it for now. As always, thanks very much for watching.